Hello, everyone. This is Professor Noah Arsenault. I've decided to help out with JMS 200 this semester. This is currently the spring 2020 semester. We've been forced to go online, teach our classes entirely virtual, and I want to help out where I can. What I'm going to talk about is a form of media consumption known as pay per view. This is actually an old idea, as I'm about to talk about. It's an old idea, but it is growing at an exponential rate right now for obvious reasons. We are home, in our apartments, in our rooms, in our homes, watching things, and of course, we are, for the most part, paying for them. So I want to talk about this form of media consumption and some of the historical precedent and the way the industry has been moving towards this for quite a long time. In 1911, there was something called the Telephone Herald. This was in New Jersey. The idea actually came from Hungary. An American businessman was exposed to the idea there was a functioning system like this in Budapest, I believe. He instituted a similar system here in the United States. It used telephone lines to deliver media content. Now, bear in mind, this is before radio broadcasting. So, this was before people could sit in their homes and hear speeches and music and kid stories and stock market news, all the stuff that we now associate with broadcasting. You could get this through the telephone, but you did have to pay for it. The photograph here shows people listening, and you had to listen with these earphones because loudspeakers, or really well functioning loudspeakers, hadn't quite been developed yet. And you paid money to have audio content beamed directly into your home. Here's some newspaper ads talking about it. I love this one. It is the 20th century newspaper. No ink, no paper, no presses. And it's only 5 cents a day. Here's another ad for the Southern California Telephone Herald. I just like this image because it says sale of human hair goods at the bottom. Now, to be clear, I don't know if the Telephone Herald actually had a system in Southern California. I don't know if that existed. Maybe it was advertised and never came to fruition. Okay, jumping ahead several decades, now I'm going beyond radio up into television. Television, for most of its early decades, was free, right? That is one of the selling points of traditional over the air television. You put up your old fashioned rabbit ears, you get content that is over the terrestrial airwaves, and you can watch it for free. But people have been experimenting with a long time. How can we get consumers to pay for this content? This system, telemeter, scrambled the signal. The television was connected to a telephone line, and if you paid money, the system would unscramble the signal, right? If you were So it involved telephone connected to a television, and you would actually pay for the video content that was being brought to you. There was actually a box on top of the TV where you would put coins in, and somehow it would register if you put in the right amount of coins. It would unscramble the signal so you could watch that particular television program. Testing of this was done in the early 1950s in a few locations in California. All right, now jumping forward a few more decades, I could talk about cable television. That deserves its own separate video. But what I want to talk about specifically now is this thing called Cube. See it right there? Cube. Cube. Cube was a project that began in the 1970s. It was started by Warner Communications. You might know the name Warner as in Warner Brothers. Okay, Warner Communications wants to find a way that they can sell pay per view movies to people somehow through cable television. Not like HBO, where you pay one monthly fee and you can watch all the movies you want. They want to charge discreetly. So if you watch Jaws, if you watched The Godfather, you would pay specifically for that. So a system was developed that involved a two-way connection with the television. And again, this was through cable television. If you switched your channel to a movie and left it on for a certain period of time, you were automatically billed at the end of the month. Now, this is not exactly like pay per view the way we use it now, because the movie started at a predetermined time. If Jaws was starting at 7 p.m., it started at 7 p.m. for everyone. It didn't start at 7:05 or 7:40 based on your own needs. But that was the idea. If you switched to JAWS at 7 o'clock and left it on for a certain period of time, you were billed. Now, when this system was developed, someone realized, hey, if we have two-way interactivity with the television, we can do interactive television. That's what Cube was. Here's an ad. This is from the late 70s. The system was introduced in Columbus, Ohio in 1977, and it was pretty active for a couple of years into the early 80s. There were systems in other cities, but Columbus, Ohio was really the focal point. And what they're saying here, the age of passive viewing is over. It is truly interactive TV. You could do games, you could do polls. A person on a TV show could say, hey, do you want to hear more about this? Do you want to hear more about that? They would do talent shows, something like American Idol, where you could actually pick the person that you like, and the home viewers could pick the winner. Andy Kaufman, for those of you out there who know who Andy Kaufman is, Andy Kaufman appeared on one of these interactive talent shows. There was also a lot of local programming, something akin to what we would call public access programming, and they had other types of programming, including educational programming. Some universities in Ohio actually conducted classes through the television. Now, here is a cover of Newsweek from the late 70s. They're showing TV of the future. And over here on the left, you can see some kids playing a video game. You can see a couple, presumably that's the parents, watching a big giant screen TV with a man who looks an awful lot like Will Ferrell to me. There is a VCR. It looks like a Laserdisc player. There's a computer on the far right. You have a kid on the ground listening to a transistor radio. There's a child in the back with a film camera. What I think is amazing about this is that this image from 1978 is accurate. This is TV of the future, but what the image gets wrong is that all of these devices have now been compressed into one. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out, look in the middle, look closely in the middle. That is a Cube box. Cube is being marketed and promoted as TV of the future. Here are some other images of Cube. These are some promotional images. I've done some research on this. And if you look really closely, if you squint really closely at that image, it says how many shoppers are in the home, and they're asking people to weigh in. And isn't this what modern media is all about? How many shoppers are in the home? Here we have an ad from the musician Todd Rundgren. He did a concert that was an interactive concert. Apparently, Todd Rundgren was such a fan of Cube that he contacted the producers and programmers and volunteered his services. He thought it was such a cool idea that he approached them to create an interactive music concert. Here we have a photograph of something called Sight on Sound. This was a newspaper clipping that I found. This was a program where you could pick the music video. Now, bear in mind, in the late 70s, there weren't really a lot of music videos the way we came to know them later. But here you could say, I want to watch AC/DC, I want to watch The Pretenders, or I want to watch Rod Stewart. You could pick the program that you wanted. Now, in most history books, when people write about cable television history, they talk about Cube, and it is usually dismissed as a mistake or a failure or something that didn't work. And I've done some research on Cube, and I beg to differ. We now have pay-per-view movies, which is exactly what Cube was designed to introduce. There was a channel devoted specifically to children's programming that was called Pinwheel, that was later spun off as its own separate channel and was renamed Nickelodeon. Warner was also the company that later launched MTV, right? I think we all know MTV. And this image right here certainly looks like an early version of MTV. So you might say it was a quote unquote failure, but many of the ideas that Cube experimented with, including pay-per-view, did come into fruition. Now, this image is from the later years of Cube, in its final years. This is probably be 1983, 1984, something like that. You could actually connect Cube to an Atari computer, and the idea was that not only was it interactive television, but you could also interact and communicate with other people who were subscribers to the same system. And I just like the way this man is looking so lovingly at the woman with this old Atari in front of him. And if you look in the center of the image by his left hand, that is a Cube box. Okay, sticking with the 1970s, I want to talk about another technology. This is also a big part of the development of pay per view. Sony Betamax, 1975. This was a way to record live television and play it back later. These were big, kind of clunky machines, but this is the beginning of people recording content and time shifting, as we now use the term, the beginning of time shifting. There was also VHS technology. Now, VHS and Betamax did basically the same thing. Betamax was superior audio and video quality. Excuse me, superior audio and video quality. And I do remember, I am of a certain age, I remember going to rental stores and you could pick the Betamax tapes or you could pick the VHS tapes. Why is it that in the great format wars, VHS eventually won out? I've heard different things used to explain that, but the explanation that makes the most sense to me was the way VHS licensed its technology. Sony, which was the creator of Betamax, was the only company that would manufacture Betamax machines. Whereas VHS you could buy from many, many different companies, and the companies paid a certain licensing fee. But if you went to the store, Sears, if you remember Sears, if you went to Sears to buy a VCR, you had many, many VHS options to choose from, whereas you only had one Betamax option to choose from. VHS tapes could also be set to record longer. You could record, I believe it was either 6 or 8 hours. You could record a significant amount of time. Now, granted, the quality is low. The quality was low, but if you wanted to record an entire football game or entire baseball game or something like that, or Gone with the Wind, right? That's a long movie. It was easier to do that on VHS rather than a Betamax tape, which had shorter tapes. Here is a great ad for VHS.
Shaping up your video is as easy as this with the HR7100 video recorder from JVC with color-coded feather touch controls, fast shuffle search, a 10-day timer, and full-function remote control. JVC's HR7100 is simply great video, and its very affordable price makes it great video value, too.
All right, now this is something you know. This is the kind of thing that if I were creating the multiple choice exam for a class, hypothetically, if I were doing something like that, I think I might put something like this on the exam. I'm just saying. There was a Supreme Court case, now known as the Sony Betamax case, which established that time shifting was legal. Universal Studios and others, including Disney, we know how much Disney likes to sell their product over and over and over in multiple formats. Disney and Universal didn't want people to time shift shows. They thought this was actually illegal because when you're time shifting, you are destroying the value that advertisers had purchased. Okay? Advertisers want you to watch their content in real time. They don't want you to fast forward through it. They don't want you to skip over it. If we allow people, this was the argument against it, if we allow people to record Gunsmoke or Mannix or whatever, Quincy, I think that was a show from the 80s, if we allow people to record these shows and fast forward them, then the advertisers aren't getting their money. The Supreme Court ruled it was legal to time shift entertainment for your own personal consumption. You couldn't record a show and then charge money and play it back later, but you could record a show for your own use. Now, something that is talked about in the Hansen textbook, Chapter 8, is whether or not home video consumption and new forms of technology change content. And I think there's something to be said for that. When people could consume videos on VHS in the privacy of their own home, meaning they didn't have to go out into a movie theater and be seen publicly going to see something of questionable quality, people were more inclined to consume things of, let's say, questionable taste, let's say adult entertainment. Okay? In England, they were so concerned about the rise of horrific and gory and sort of nasty movies, they actually came up with a term called video nasties. There was a certain number of films that were banned in the UK, including this one, Cannibal Holocaust. And we know what happens when you ban things, it makes them insanely collectible. Cannibal Holocaust now has an incredible reputation. I've been interested in this film for many years. I've never had the nerve or the stomach to make myself watch it. I have some sense that it would be a pretty repulsive film. Now, here's the takeaway that I want to stress right here. Hollywood was originally quite reluctant. Hollywood didn't like the idea of VHS. They want you to go to the movie theater, okay? They want you to go to the movie theater and buy expensive popcorn. But in the late 70s and early 80s, the studios reluctantly agreed that they could not stop this. It's like fighting the ocean. So they were releasing movies on home video, charging $70 to $80. Now at the time, people might only spend $2 to go see a movie in the theater, so that's a massive, massive price. And many of the studios would not allow rental. So the way to get around this, right, the loophole is that these rental clubs started, quote unquote club. You pay a club fee, and then you could check out a certain number of movies per month. They're not renting you the movie, right? But there's using some loophole. Eventually, Hollywood gives in and realizes that people want to consume movies at home, first on VHS, then on DVD, and now this is another revenue stream. In fact, selling DVDs is still a pretty big revenue stream. Aquaman was a massive selling movie on DVD in 2019. Now, before we start talking about the modern stuff, I want to go over this, okay? I want to go over this chart. This chart from a book from a few years ago um, shows the different windows, okay? This is from 2014, which is some time ago, but it shows the theatrical distribution release schedule, right? This is sometimes called windowing, where you release content in different formats and different platforms at different times. Start with a theatrical, then maybe you can watch it in a hotel and airlines. Then there comes a DVD, then a pay TV rental, then a digital rental, and finally at the end, when we're down into the long tail, is broadcasting. Okay? Releasing something on every platform, every window simultaneously is something that Hollywood has resisted for a very, very, very long time. We call that day and date releasing. It's released everywhere all at once. The film Snowpiercer, which is on Netflix, did that a couple years ago. Then we had The Interview, which did that. Now that was a very, very unusual case. If you remember that, North Korea was saying they were going to blow up movie theaters that were showing it. So The Interview was released in some theaters, but also streaming video on demand at the same time. Another film that tried to do this was a film called Tower Heist. This is back in 2011. Universal wanted to put it on demand 3 weeks after its original release, and movie theater owners actually resisted. The movie theater owners said, if you do this, if you put your movie in a home video, subscription video on demand, if you do it in this platform, we're going to block you and we're not going to show your movie in the theater. So that was pulled. Okay, that was pulled. The release, the home video release, and the streaming video release was delayed a little bit, but people have been trying to do this for quite some time. Now, before I get into some other things, I want to show this chart. This is from Nielsen, the company that determines audience metrics for video, radio consumption. In fact, Nielsen even tracks internet usage. They track just about everything you can imagine. Now, these stats are from 2018, late 2018 and late 2017. They didn't come out until March 2019. These were the most recent ones that I could find. And according to this, the average person, 18 plus, spends about 5.5 hours a day consuming some type of video content. And this shows the different platforms. And this 5 hour, 5.5 hour mark has been pretty consistent. Television, live television, and time shifted television accounts for the bulk of it. That's the big blue line. And Netflix would be included in that as time shifted TV. Okay? Netflix would be included that. My guess, in fact, I think it's a reasonable guess, is a year from now, after we spend several weeks or a couple of weeks, who knows how long we're going to be stuck at home, I think people are going to consume more than 5.5 hours of video a day. Okay, this brings us up to the present day. I am recording this video on March 23rd in the year 2020, and video on demand is blowing up. I mean, every time I look at one of the trades that talks about this stuff, there's some new development, okay? People are at home. We can't congregate in large groups. Movie theaters all across the country are shut down. So Trolls 2, which I have to imagine that is not a movie that I care to see, and I don't think I'll ever see it, but if that's your cup of tea, so be it. Trolls 2 shattered records for VOD release. And this from Forbes says it sets a dangerous precedent. What this means is yes, even when movie theaters open back up, people are still going to expect to see fresh original content at home. The film Invisible Man has also this release, and I'm sure there's a dozen others that I can't even think of, but everything is coming out almost immediately video on demand. Which brings me to this. This relates also to Chapter 8 in the Hansen text. That talks about studio system, the Hollywood studio system of the past. What that meant was that you had these studios, a handful of studios, that controlled the production, right? They controlled the production of movies. They also controlled the distribution and they owned the outlets, the movie theaters where people would watch them. This gave incredible control over to these studios. The courts dismantled this system, ruled that it was illegal, abuse of power, something along those lines. Now I think we're coming back to that. This is just my own argument that we're coming back to that. These streaming channels, when they create original content and fund original content, and it's only available on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon or Disney Plus, that to me seems the 21st century version of the studio system. They are creating the content, controlling the distribution, and charging consumers for it. Whether that's good or bad, it's not going away. Now, this is totally different than subscription video on demand. This relates also a little bit to the Hansen text where it talks about CGI and the growth of CGI. I assume most of y'all, you're intelligent students, have heard about these deep fakes. This one has Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland doing a scene from Back to the Future. These actors weren't actually doing this. People can now use computers with the unbelievable processing power that they have to manipulate the pixels in such a way that it looks as if these actors made a film they never actually made. A scary thing, at least for you actors out there, a scary thing is that we might not need human actors, okay? You could recreate a sitcom using characters from other sitcoms, actors from other movies, and just create entirely original content based on things that have already been done. Not saying this is going to happen, this is just my speculation as a possibility. So, there you have it, some historical precedent talking about the rise of pay per view. Maybe you learned a little something. I hope you found it somewhat entertaining. And in closing, please wash your hands.